filmed. So, so yes, I'm sure there won't be any sort of four-letter words being expressed or anything like that.
Oh, is that a threat?
Or perhaps it should be. This is a humanistic conference. We're hearing about these 1970s groups. I mean, yes, we're all very respectable here, aren't we? Malcolm is a group and individual psychotherapist for over 30 years. And he's the co-director and co-founder of Alternatives, St James's Church, London, which you all have heard of. His approach involves finding your heart and accessing truth. Heart, truth, love, words we've heard a lot of so much today already. He wrote the book, I love books with wonderful titles. Falling in Love, Staying in Love. What a wonderful title. Piatka's 2004. And he co-presented the Channel 4 series on relationships made for each other, which I remember, 2003, 2004. Malcolm runs courses annually at Dinas Skiros and at Cortia Romero and at a place I can't pronounce beginning with F. And that's not a four-letter word.
Yeah, just about to jump in there.
And he teaches at Esselen, the legendary Esselen in California, and Findord in Scotland. And with no further ado, I'm delighted to introduce Malcolm Stern.
Just take a moment to tune into you. Because it's always scary. I started to write notes this morning. I thought, nah, I'm not doing that. It's like I have to trust that what I need to say is going to be said. And I'd like to share a little bit about my journey, just because I'm a complete narcissist. But after that, I'll come back to being a human being again with you. But it's not true. I'm not a complete narcissist. But I'd just like to say a little bit about how I came to be doing what I'm doing. I went to public school and left with my father. Wanted me to be a professional, and it was a bit sad when I didn't go for doctoring, but went for accountancy, which bored the brains out of me. My apologies to any accountants here. And then I thought I'd made a radical shift by going into a semi-profession and became an estate agent for a number of years. And one day I was with some friends, and we went round to one of my mates' houses, and we took this tiny little thing on a bit of blotting paper called acid. I had very little idea about it, but it was tiny, so I took it, and suddenly my entire view of the universe changed, and who I was changed, and I was never able to see life through the same lens again. And it has led me for the rest of my life, and I know that my friends who I took the acid with, those who are still alive, many of them killed themselves with drugs, but then there's another story, they thought I never came down from that acid trip, and I think it's probably true. That actually a door got awoken. But this is not a sort of a statement about the wonders of drug taking. I think if we don't earn our development, then we suffer at the hands of the forces that we come into contact with. I think Timothy Leary called taking acid like putting rocket fuel into a bicycle. And for a lot of people, they go on drug trips and never come down, and really never come down. They don't come into a different state other than to have lost touch with reality. So, but it led me on a path exploring what it was to be living some sort of spiritual life. And I'm wary of that word, even as I'm also wary of the word love, although what you said about love was very beautiful. But I think it's very easy to use the word spiritual, and running alternatives as I do, where we have speakers all the time like Deepak Chopra, Eckhart Tolle, Marianne Williamson, and Liz Gilbert. We have some great speakers, but I think there's a danger in self-aggrandizement, and also in aggrandizement of others thinking we're so wonderful. And as my great teacher Ramdas said, once he starts to believe what people were saying about him, he was enlightened, he was wise, he was an amazing, extraordinary human being, all he needed to do was get into a relationship for 6 months. And I went through a phase in my 30s, so I went through this drug trip anyway, so I tried out a few different things. I sailed on the Rainbow Warrior with Greenpeace, I worked in a terminal cancer hospice. And one day I walked into a therapy group. I'd gone into individual therapy because my relationships were so fucked up, that's my last word. But I'd gone into individual therapy for about 3 years with Ian Gordon Brown, who was the founder of transpersonal psychology. And then followed that with Ursula Fawcett, who became a very close friend as well, who died a couple of years ago. And I walked into a therapy group, and I realised, I thought I could do much better than this woman's doing. I thought, God, you're such an arrogant bastard. But actually, I found my life's calling. In that moment, I knew that was the area where I needed to go. And I've been doing it for about 30 years, and my friend Leo, who's in the back, I was just talking to him in the toilets, as one does. And so I remembered a remark he'd made to me about 25 years ago at Findhorn, where he'd said, your certification is actually the people who come to you, who return to you. That's your certification. That's certification from the universe. And my certification is rather meagre. I did the IDHP, 2-year humanistic psychology training. But I don't believe my training started until I started to apprentice myself to people who I really was inspired by. I spent 3 years with Andrew Watson, who's Lyle Watson's brother, travelling around Europe and assisting him in groups. And I spent a long time with Ramdas, going to various retreats and bringing him over a few times for alternatives. He came 3 times during the 80s. And I learned an awful lot from watching people who really knew what they were doing do it. And then I found out that the practice is actually the practice itself, and I still feel that I'm in the process of exploring the practice. And one of the things I've learned is that there is a sixth sense that people talk about, and that sixth sense we often think of it as something fairly nebulous, that it's instinctive. But actually, for me, it's not instinctive at all. For me, it's a muscle that I'm using again and again and again. So when I'm working in a group and someone tells me they're seeing little pink bubbles, then they're seeing little pink bubbles, and that's what I work with, is how they see those little pink bubbles and what's going on with those. Rather than, a little bit like Dina's story of talking about the voice in the wall speaking. It's a little bit like, I don't want to deny anyone's reality, because actually we are in a state of mass hypnosis here anyway. We're believing the reality we've been given. And as I said recently at the Compassionate Mental Health Conference with Dina, where we were both presenting, and recently what was said there was that who is to say that it's sane to be able to be seemingly sane in the world we're living in? And the world we're living in is full of insanity. And I can't maintain my own sanity in the face of that. But what I can maintain are the things I do have control over, which are my integrity, my sense of authenticity, and my willingness to explore the road of compassion. And latterly, and I'm just working on this as a book right now, and we're almost ready to put it into publishers, which is around deep empathy. And my belief is that we are entering into a phase where the next evolution of humanity, if it survives, and I remember Joanna Macy, when she came to St James's, saying, well, we're entering the next stage, and we don't know whether we're going to survive or not as a species. And in the great scheme of things, in some ways that's pretty irrelevant as well. But what she said in that talk was, well, we're entering the next phase, and we don't know whether we'll survive, but what we can do is to bring everything we can to that process of living and throw ourselves wholeheartedly into it. So my practice is to throw myself wholeheartedly into my life, and then to take whatever comes as life's lessons and to be able to work with them rather than to push them away. And in a moment I'm going to tell you a story which is what has absolutely transformed me over the last 3.5 years. So I've been on this road for a long time, exploring for a long time, listening to some very great teachers, listening also to some very wonderful egos disguised as great teachers. And my very firm belief is also, and belief is quite an interesting thing as well, because it's something that you develop over a lifetime, really. It's like you can be radical and go, well, I believe the Earth's flat, and actually there'll be people who buy that along with you. But my observation and my experience is also that we're in a process of becoming. And I think in that process of becoming, then we have the opportunity to develop something within ourselves. And I was recently talking to Marianne Williamson. I did an interview with her before her talk at Logan Hall a couple of weeks ago. And she said something very profound, which I really like, because it's absolutely what I think as well. She said that the age of the soloist is dead. There are no more Martin Luther Kings, the Kennedys, where you just shoot them and you get rid of the soloist. She said, actually the choir is being formed right now, and we are the choir. And this is the hymn book that we have to sing from, is actually to follow the essence of what's being presented to us as human beings. And my understanding is that the essence of what's being presented to us as human beings is that we have the potential to become highly attuned, to become, as I would be describing this in my book, empaths. And it's not going to be everybody's story, but it's also not for the elite few. It's whether or not we can develop and feed that sensitivity inside ourselves. And that sensitivity inside ourselves is so fragile, so vulnerable, but it's also so potent. And everything that life throws at us will teach us in one way or another. And I never know what happens when I'm about to tell this story, because sometimes I have tears, and sometimes I don't, and I just trust the process that happens around that. So, on December the 11th, December 11th, 2014, my daughter visited Rome. And she was a highly empathic human being. She worked for a kids company. She was a very vibrant human being. And she'd gone through about 10 years previously, she'd gone through a serious mental breakdown, which she'd been put into a highly, intensive care psychiatric unit, and took her a year to break her way through that. I fought the system like hell, enlisted the help of a friend who was a psychiatrist, another friend of mine who worked on patients' rights panels, and found out how to work the system. So I got her transferred eventually to something which was much lower tech, and it took her 4 months once she got there to come through that. So overall it was a year. And in my mind, she'd emerged, and she'd come through that unscathed. And she got married to a very lovely man called Ian in 2013. And then she went through a really manic phase again. And that manic phase is something that I've had to learn so much about mania. I hate labels. In compassionate mental health, one of the things we do is that we refuse to allow labels. So people come, they are not psychopathic, they are not manic depressive, they're not bipolar, they're not schizophrenic, they're human beings who are going through a range of experiences who need deeply to be met at the core of their beings. And in being met in the core of their beings, there is the possibility of transformation. And I've witnessed this time and time again. This isn't just some random idea I've had. This is a practice I'm engaged with and involved with. And for me, the practice of presence is one of the great practices we can bring to our life's journey. And it's simple. I mean, right now, are you present? Do I have your attention? Will you give me your attention? So I will be much more profound with your full attention on me than if you're going, oh, I wonder what I'm going to eat tonight for supper, or where am I going to go after this, or I wonder who I'll be with in the small groups. He looks nice, or she looks nice. Presence. And it's something that we give as a gift to each other. So Melissa went through this enormous curve where she went through about 6 months of absolute mania. And I didn't like her very much during this period. And for me, one of the things for me about being authentic is that I am going to speak my truth no matter what. I learned this, actually, one of my great teachers was Melissa when she was born. We had this fantastic home birth plan with an osteopath, radial osteopath and a healer, and people chanting and all sorts of crap like that. And then after about 18 hours, nothing was happening. She got rushed to hospital, and there was a cesarean operation. And I thought she may not come through it. But as the nurse handed her to me, I took her in my arms, and my tears started to flow. And they're not tears of sadness, they were tears of being utterly moved by the scenario. And then I realised I'm standing in a room full of strangers, so I better just bottle this tear. So I stopped myself. And in that process of stopping ourselves from our feelings, we actually bottle away the essence of who we are. Because I believe one of the most profound things about us as human beings is our ability to deeply have compassion for others, to take that place of empathy and live it, and practice it, and be it. And I determined that I wouldn't do that again. So when my father died in 2011, I gave the eulogy, and the rabbi said to me, can I see your speech first? I said, I'm terribly sorry, unless you can go do an x-ray into my head, which isn't formed yet, then no, you can't. And he was really upset that I said that my father had some similarities with the Dalai Lama, because he'd said, the Dalai Lama had said, my religion is kindness, and my father was one of the kindest men I'd ever met. So actually it's really nice to feel tears for my father, because I didn't really go there. I cried at the funeral, and I didn't really stay in that place. But when your child dies, it's a whole different ballgame, because you are going to be turned inside out and upside down. And in fact, interestingly, one of the first people I rang was Dina, because I knew that you have to be met. When you're in a place where your whole reality is being turned upside down, you need to be met. You need to be with people who can really receive you. I was part of a men's group at that time. I left the men's group, not because I couldn't talk about Melissa, but because they couldn't meet me in that place where I had suffered a terrible loss. And I tried to go into therapy straight away. Couldn't get there, I was just intellectualizing. And it took a while, and then you realise that the journey does you. It wasn't that I was a cold, unfeeling bastard. It was that the journey was doing me. And actually, that place of shock we go into after a deep traumatic experience is the place which is protecting us from being devastated by the chaos and turmoil of the things that can happen in our lives. So I had to go through that place of shock, and a wise friend of mine said, he said, Malcolm, he said, you're going to think you're normal for quite a long time, and you're not going to be normal at all for quite a long time. And it was really helpful knowing that, because there were some bizarre things that I did. Not that bizarre, but it's just like I couldn't access what was going on until the shock decided to leave me. But then I came across Bridget Bowen, who runs Compassionate Mental Health, telephoned me, and she said, oh, I'm running this conference at Compassionate Mental Health in Wales. Would you come and be the Master of Ceremonies there? And I said, yeah, I certainly will. And she had no idea about Melissa. She knew that I was a facilitator, and she knew that I ran groups. But she had no idea about Melissa. And actually the gift she gave me, I thought I was going there to educate people. And what I found out was that I was actually going to be educated. And the gift that she gave me in bringing that conference to me is that I actually started to understand mental ill health in a way I never had before. And I was very proud of myself as a therapist that I was working with the well, you know, the sort of like the people who are sort of looking for their life's journey and their human potential. And it's utter bullshit. We can go down that road for a really long time, staying clear of the things that are horrendous pains. When I was 18 years old, when my sister was 18 years old, I was 19 and I was still living at home with my parents. She had a severe psychotic breakdown, which unfortunately she still suffers from at the age of 67 now. And she's in a Jewish care home. The nice thing is the Jews look after themselves after each other quite well, and the care home is actually a very decent place. But she went in and out of psychosis, had 55 electric shock treatments over the course of 10 years, which paid, as I understand it, to any possibility of recovery. But what it did for me is it made me avoid, like the plague, mental illness. And fortunately, I don't think about it as mental illness anymore. I think about it as actually people losing touch with the perceived reality and entering into another state. And I think if I'd really understood Melissa, I would have been able to work a lot more deeply with Melissa as well. I'd got the support to understand that, but I've had to be educated. And during that period after Melissa died, I joined a Samaritans group for survivors of suicide. And I'm there in a group with people who can't run a group anything like as well as I can run a group. And I didn't have space for my arrogance in that space either. I had to actually go with the fact that I was being educated with other people's stories. So for 6 weeks this group ran, and people were telling a story about how they'd been bereaved by suicide. And I learned a lot, and there was a wonderful anaesthetist in the group who said, and this was such a gift to me, and that's the thing, our gifts come in really odd ways. She said, my son was utterly obnoxious during the manic period. And then when he hit the depressive period, it was about 1,000 times worse than anything you can describe as depression. And that was a gift, because I felt so guilty that I had not liked, I've always loved Melissa, and I still love Melissa. But what I hadn't done was liked her. I found her obnoxious, I found her, you know, sort of off the wall, and hadn't understood that she was going through a very, very deep, traumatizing journey that we couldn't meet her in. So she's been an extraordinary education, because I look for places to speak now. And so when Richard approached me about speaking here, madness transformation, absolutely, I'm on. I will look for any places I can talk about it, because for me that's part of the healing and the facing of the legacy of having been bereaved by suicide of a child. That's enormous, and you know that, and I know that, but I'm still in the process of learning it. And 3.5 years on from that, from her suicide, I'm now in a place where I can say with utter honesty that it was both the worst experience of my life and the most transforming experience of my life. And Frank Ostrozewski, who wrote a book called The 5 Invitations, he sat with more than 2,000 people while they died, and he made this excellent book, which is the invitations that he would give to people to truly live while you're living and not have to regret when you're dying. The first invitation is do it now. And do it now means whatever you think you're doing, don't think, oh, well, when I get old, I'll take my trip to Nepal, or I'll go and do something, because I'll plan it for the future. Do it now. But one of the invitations which I have really, I'm really recognising as a profound invitation, is welcome everything, reject nothing. And that's a very difficult invitation as well, because some of the things that are happening in our lives, I was really touched by the beautiful film we showed before of Jay Ramsey, is that he's actually having to work with that place of welcoming a deep disintegration, which may kill him and may not, but he's still having to work with that rather than to reject what comes in him. So I think what I'd like to do, because I always find that where the real juice comes in these things, and I've got about 10 minutes left, I think. It's having 5, I'm telling you. 10? So, sorry, I'm close. No, I won't go fully, don't worry. But I'd like to just engage with you a little bit, because I actually think that there's such wisdom that comes, and one of the ethos I've had around alternatives is that when the speaker actually starts to deal with the audience, when they're not just the sponges who are sitting soaking up the wisdom of this great master, Harry, I'm blessed to be you all, then actually that's when the real juice starts to happen. So I will try and keep it to 5 April, sorry, I'm just playing with you. Can we just have actually I didn't start at 5 past, so I have got 10. So, sorry, as we were, so can we get the mic and just sort of like take a few questions, and Gemma won't film you unless you say, my egocist is really out here right now, please could you film me? But she won't film me, but she's taking, she's going to actually keep the camera on me, and so she'll be hearing what you have to say, but she won't be filming you. So is there anyone who'd like to say anything to me? Or am I going to die a miserable death?
I'd like to say, and I hope it's not insensitive to say this, but I did 6 years of counselling and psychotherapy training, and the one remark that's of all those hours that stayed with me most was when my body psychotherapy trainer said, "A mother never gets over losing a child." I'm just sharing that as that was the most, out of the millions of words that were said, that was the one that really stayed with me.
Thank you, Richard. I want to say that actually Skiros was really helpful to me in this as well, so it's another thing I have to thank Dina for, but we made, with all of the community that were there, so over 100 people, we made a memorial to Melissa, which we hang in one of the circles, one of the working circles there, and everyone chipped in and did their bit. It was a mosaic. There was thousands and thousands of people with a heart with wings, which was the Sufi symbol, which was my original spiritual journey was through the Sufis. And it's so lovely to sort of create creativity around dying, but no, you never get past it. And I don't want to get past it. It's now part of who I am. And actually it's educating me, and of course I wish it hadn't happened. But since it has happened, I'd rather it used me in the way that it can. Anyone else want to say something?
I don't want to say something, but I need to say something. First of all, want to, I will be in tears probably, but I want to convey my sympathy for you, to you, because I share the loss of a child, not from suicide, but last year my 38-year-old daughter died from cancer after 2.5 months from the diagnosis to the death. And it has transformed my life. I have written 50 poems to her, which I will at some point in the future share with the world. I want to live safely those poems. And there are some here who already know this story of mine, and they have been incredibly supportive and helpful and empathic. But I just, how are you?
Come give me a hug. Let's share our sadness that I've lost my child.
Thank you.
And that's what we can do as well. I remember having lunch with Ronnie Lang once, and he said, if people learned how to hug, I'd be out of a job. Yeah. Who's got the mic?
It was your words about being truly
Can you hold
met.
it closer?
Your words about being truly met by Dina after your daughter had committed suicide really resonated with me. And I just wanted to say that throughout today, I have felt truly met. I have recently been diagnosed with cancer, and Jay truly met me in his talk because it was the first time I felt truly met as a person, not as somebody who's been medicalised, objectified, identified with what I have, and so on and so forth. And then your story of the loss of your daughter felt truly met too. I have 2 children who were both born with disability, so I struggle with the loss. They're both grown up now, they live in the world, they're marvellous. However, you never get over the loss. And I just want to thank whoever, and to you, George, who I felt truly met when you talked about love. It had such a resonance, it just went straight through my being. And yeah, I just want to say thank you. And thank you everybody for I think your authenticity and honesty is beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.